Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Brandy Horton, and I am the Vice President of Communications at Rails to Trails Conservancy. And I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today, because at Rails to Trails, we've been thinking so much about the impact and the potential of this moment we're in. And we just have a great group of folks who can, I think, put perspective and shape around that. So I'm really thrilled, and thank you so much again for being with us. The conversation that we're having, and I think the frame of mind to bring to the discussion, is about really the urgency and the opportunity that we have before us. You know, we've celebrated as a movement so much the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the impact that just unprecedented funding can really have on taking the movement for trails, walking, and biking to a whole nother level. But something that we've been thinking about here at Rails to Trails Conservancy, and I think our counterparts that are joining us today, is that this is maybe more than a moment, and it is actually a chance to transform how the political, the funding, the public kind of context around trails, walking, and biking happens. Really using this moment with all of this money and all of this support to think about, how do we make this last for the next 10, 15, 20 years? What does that look like? Whether or not the money is the same, how do we create kind of the context around our movement and our infrastructure so that we can continue to have this success, so that trail networks and active transportation networks are prioritized as essential to communities, are prioritized because of the contributions that they make to communities for really significant issues of equitable access to mobility, issues of climate. My light just went off, but I will turn that back on. Unexpected technical difficulty. I wasn't prepared for that one. And so with that, let me do a quick round of introductions. We have Sarah Clark Stewart with the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. She is also the chair of the Circuit Trails Coalition, which is one of the examples we're going to talk about in depth today. We have Lena Karstens, who is the Development Officer for Public Grants with the Atlanta BELTLINE, Inc. And she is here for Clyde Higgs today, who couldn't make it because he is part of a breaking news meeting around a very brand new RAISE grant that they just received. So I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that momentarily. We have Liz Thorstensen, who is the Vice President of Trail Development at Rails to Trails Conservancy. And Liz is really the driving force behind RTC's Trail Nation initiative, which is doing a lot of work to kind of bring trail networks to scale all across the country. How can we get more trail networks in more places, build the community around that, the examples, the kind of best practices to bring that work to life. And then Kevin Mills is our Vice President of Policy. And I would say he is the driving force behind the political strategy and the funding strategy to actually put the resources and the political will behind how we get this work done. So together, Liz and Kevin are really championing our strategy and our approach to how do we make the most out of this moment and this time that we're in. So thank you all for making the time today. I think there's just a lot of really exciting insight to share with the group. And with that, Kevin, I'm going to turn it to you to take us through what has happened in the past 18 months and what do we know?
So yeah, we're just a little more than a year and a half in since the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law passed, and infrastructure dollars are really gushing at all levels at this point. And that makes a generational opportunity to improve communities, but it also depends on priorities, right? There's more money for everything. So depending on how well priorities are set, we could make things much better or maybe make things a bit worse if we invest in the wrong things. So it's a critical moment to make the right choices. And the infrastructure bill itself articulated three dominant values. They were safety, the environment or climate, and equity. And we'll talk a lot about how those values might be suffused through the implementation that's going on. And we do see, very optimistically, some early signs of a shift in perspective where there's a broader recognition that active transportation is a real priority now and going forward. Just one example of that is the recent RAISE grants from USDOT, where 48 states included elements of walking and biking or trails in their successful applications. And so it really has become, a bit geographically universal. Next slide. So the progress needs to be made at the local, state, and federal levels, and that there's some heavy lifting to do at all of those levels to be successful. So at the federal level, the Department of Transportation and Federal Highways as one critical part of that, it handles most of the programs of concern to our community, is that they've had to issue guidance covering all the policy reforms from the bill. They've had to define new programs. They've allocated dollars to the states to implement programs, which they're in charge of. They've launched many discretionary grant programs, which also involves figuring out what are the right criteria, putting out the calls for proposals, and making the hard choices among the avalanche of applications to make good awards. And then at the state level, they're updating their policies and priorities. They're doing more than this, but the biggest piece of work is that they implement formula programs where the biggest chunk of dollars are in a transportation bill from the federal government. And then regions, primarily metropolitan planning organizations, are implementing portions of key programs such as the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is the nation's largest source of funding for trails, walking, and biking, as well as surface transportation block grants, which are the most flexible source of transportation money that's out there. And they, of course, are also responsible for developing key plans that will determine where resources ought to flow. Next slide, please. So let's go back to those core values that were in the infrastructure law. They were safety, climate, and equity. How are they being implemented? So I'd put out there that active transportation really prospers when these values are elevated and put it at the forefront of what the agencies are doing. The states control the majority of transportation funds, including federal transportation funds, and they have a lot of flexibility about how they spend those resources. So as we look across the country, that change is going to be uneven because with the authority that the states have, it will depend on decisions being made at that level, whether they're moving things in the right direction or not. It does tend to be maybe a bit like a battleship where there's a lot of history there of running some very big programs over time. And so sometimes it can feel incremental to be making change in terms of how the state DOTs prioritize things. But we're seeing sure progress and maybe big leaps forward in some states. And then we have great examples of prioritizing multiple modes of transportation, having accountability for climate in some states where they're getting out in front of the federal accountability. And we have instances where they're providing technical assistance to make sure there's equitable access to the funds. And many of these accomplishments are in states you might guess are excelling, but some of them are in states you wouldn't expect to be excelling, and some that had a troubled history with our programs that are starting to do things differently. And that's really a great source of optimism. And then other states, though, are doubling down on the assumption that cars are going to meet everyone's needs every day. And so we still certainly have work to do in terms of bringing state DOTs along. And that's something that we're investing more in at RTC than ever before. Next slide, please. So the U.S. Department of Transportation has some direct grant programs. It's far smaller than the state formula dollars, but it's way bigger than ever before. There are more programs and more dollars available through this means than ever before. And it's an incredible opportunity for investment in what have been some neglected priorities, and then also to demonstrate the benefits of having a really balanced transportation system overall that serves those core values have been talking about here. And one thing that we're really excited about is that active transportation connectivity, not just walking and biking facilities, but really thinking about how they work together to get people where they're going, to connect communities to each other and things like that. That's consistently been a prime beneficiary of these grant awards through a number of key programs, including, we've mentioned RAISE already. There's a Safe Streets and Roads for All program that's new, a Reconnecting Communities program that's equity focused. All of these programs, really active transportation connectivity's been a beneficiary of. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we're thinking now about is how do we develop levers, right? So we see the progress on the ground from these investments. We're trying to overcome what's been status quo that's not been invested enough in what active transportation can bring to communities. So what do we do to accelerate the change and make sure that these dollars go to put people first? And one thing is that federal grant portfolio I just noted really demonstrates what success can look like. We're seeing benefits on the ground that can be reused to change hearts and minds, especially locally where people are experiencing things differently. We've got states that have put forward the right priorities, and we look to kind of amplify situations where they're gaining a competitive advantage by setting these priorities that way. And we look for ways to spread success stories and make sure that those states are inspiring other states to do the right things. And then advocates have critical role in this, lifting up what works, driving accountability tools. One that we are waiting for with bated breath is a greenhouse gas rule that's long been promised by the administration that just tracks how, it gets the states to track how are they doing with their transportation system in terms of cutting emissions. And so we think that's going to be an important tool, and it should come out soon. And then we're looking to establish policies and programs that'll make sure that there's sustained success over time. And in particular, a big focus for RTC is the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, which was authorized in the infrastructure law, but is subject to yearly appropriations. And so we're working to make sure that DOT stands up that program, and then that it gets fully funded by Congress. And with that, let me turn to my colleague, Liz Thorstensen, to share more about our work.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Appreciate that. So I'm really excited to share more about RTC's vision with all of this great opportunity that Kevin just shared. And because of these incredible advances, especially at the federal level that Kevin just discussed, there's just really an incredible collective impact that we can all make together as a movement for trails, walking, and biking. And so we really sat down and talked to many of you, got lots of great ideas, and this is really, on this slide, is really what we want to achieve. The number one goal is to secure more public funds to accelerate trails and active transportation networks and connectivity. This is about more funding, more equitably distributed. As Kevin mentioned, there's an opportunity for everyone to get more, but if you're already behind, there's a huge risk of more disparity. And so that's a huge priority for our Rails to Trails Conservancy. We want to lower that risk of the disparities becoming even greater. And so we're putting a lot of emphasis on supporting communities that are already kind of lagging in this infrastructure for a variety of disadvantageous reasons. And also we want to see funding come from diverse programs, the ones that Kevin talked about. And we really want to increase the political will, clout, and capacity to accelerate our whole movement over time, not just in this moment, but to use this moment as a lever and a momentum builder for the future to keep this going. So I'll let you, I won't read the words there, but this is in essence really setting us up as a movement for success for the future. Next slide, please. So we've been doing a lot of work in our Trail Nation program, our Trail Nation Collaborative program, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we just wanted to show you the incredible momentum and demand that is out there. We have, as we've been setting up our Trail Nation Collaborative, we have identified over 120 regional trail and active transportation networks across the country that are identified and signed up for our Trail Nation Collaborative. These are emerging networks. They're in every state, including the District of Columbia, where I am, Puerto Rico, Alaska, and with many states home to more than one network, as you can see from this map. And so we're spanning all regions of the country, connecting urban, rural, suburban. It just is incredible progress for our movement. And we want to, use this map to really inspire everyone to think like this opportunity is available for all of these networks, and maybe even networks that haven't made it onto the map yet, where it's still, a gem in someone's mind coming to fruition. So just a really great opportunity for all to lift up all of these networks across the country. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about our Trail Nation program and how we want to support you in this moment. We do have our Trail Nation Collaborative, as I mentioned, and we do offer these webinars, online dialogues, and we're going to be offering deeper technical assistance coming very soon. You'll be hearing more about that from us. So just want to encourage you to keep tuning in to all the resources that we're going to bring to you. Next slide, please. The next form of technical assistance that we wanted to highlight to you is through the Thriving Communities program, particularly through the USDOT. RTC has been fortunate to be part of the Main Street America Award, focusing on rural Main Street communities. And so we'll be kicking off that work that's going to be supporting 20 different communities that are receiving free technical assistance for 24 months, 2 years, starting this summer. And according to USDOT, they're actually opening up another round of applications. So we just really encourage you to track this. We'll be alerting you when the application window opens. This is a great opportunity for your communities to apply to receive this deeper technical assistance for the next round. And so I think the benefit of the next round is you won't be in that first, guinea pig round. You'll benefit from the learning of the first round. And I know there were hundreds of communities that applied to the first round, and they could only accept so many folks. So really keep an eye on that. That should be opening this summer through USDOT. And again, we'll keep you alert to that. Next slide, please. So before we transition over to Lena and hear lots of great in-depth about the Atlanta BELTLINE, I wanted to highlight a really exciting funding win that just came from a $16 million raise award from USDOT. This went to the Puget Sound to Pacific Trail. This included 13 jurisdictions in the application and the Peninsula Trails Coalition. It ultimately is going to connect Bainbridge Island in Washington State to La Pouche on the western coast. This builds on an existing 135-mile long Olympic Discovery Trail between Port Townsend and La Pouche. And really, it's been the coalition, the Peninsula Trails Coalition, that really brought everyone together across all these jurisdictions to win this award and advocate. So the ultimate vision is this full active transportation and trail connection between Puget Sound to the Pacific Trail and the Olympic Discovery Trail, which currently has segments totaling 90 miles across the Olympic Peninsula, and the Sound to Olympics Trail, which exists as 2 short segments of trail in Kitsap County. And this is also the western terminus of the Great American Rail Trail, which hopefully you're aware of, a vision of cross-country trail that comes from RTC also. So we're just really proud of everything that this coalition and this trail, Puget Sound to Pacific, is going to be able to achieve through this raise award, and just shows the power of bringing so many jurisdictions and counties across, this part of Washington State together to win this award and move this amazing project forward. So wanted to give it some spotlight. That's it for me. I'm going to turn it back to Brandy. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. And I think what you and Kevin have highlighted so well here is not just that trail networks and active transportation are important, but that they are relevant and making a difference in so many types of communities. When you see that map and you see that every single state is working on a regional connectivity project, that's huge. And we have basically, the evidence, the proof positive now that trail networks really are bringing impact in rural and suburban and urban communities all the same. And that is incredibly powerful. And what Lena is going to join us here to talk about is a little bit about how we can leverage this federal funding in ways to really kind of advance these transformative visions, how it ties to economic growth, how it kind of becomes fundamental to the decision-making in the place. So Lena, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Brandy. I am excited to talk to you today on behalf of Atlanta BELTLINE, Inc. We're the official implementation agency for the city of Atlanta, and I've been with ABI since 2015. And I'm going to focus on the impact that we've had and how we've been able to achieve so much success with federal infrastructure investments. And I'm going to repeat again this $25 million raise grant that we just received, because we're really excited about that. It's going to help us build out a portion of the Northeast Trail. And so the timing of this conversation is just perfect. So next slide. So I want to start real quick with an overview of the Atlanta BELTLINE portfolio of projects. So we call this Visual BELTLINE 101. And so what you may be most familiar with the BELTLINE is our 22-mile mainline trail. There's also an additional 11 miles of spur trail. The alignment primarily follows freight rail corridor that was created over a century ago to bypass this city center. The corridor also will include transit in the future. It's going to be implemented by MARTA. And when you look at all these different pieces of the Atlanta Beltline portfolio, you can see it's really a comprehensive economic and development program within the city of Atlanta. And we're responsible for each of these. And as you look at this, I would also encourage you to think about what kinds of areas is your project also touching, whether it's directly like we are, and intentionally or indirectly, because all of these together have been identified by our community as important. And we call the Beltline the People's Project because it's the community that came up with this concept and got behind it, behind a graduate thesis, and went to our elected officials and said that they wanted to see this happen. So it's really that vision from the very beginning that made sure that we're not just a green space project that's created in isolation. Next slide. So if you know much about Atlanta, you know that traffic is a challenge for us. And the Atlanta Regional Commission expects that we're going to add another 3 million people in the metro area in the next 25 years. And the Atlanta Regional Commission is our MPO, our Metropolitan Planning Organization. They've been visionary for many, many years in recognizing the importance of trails as part of our regional transportation plan. And so we haven't had to make that case with them. They've been so supportive from the beginning. They recognize that trails are not a nice to have city amenity. It's really a critical part of our solution to handle this future growth. Next slide. And I love history and understanding sort of where we got to, how we got to where we are, and especially how we can use that knowledge to create change. And we're all familiar with the stories of how transportation infrastructure, often funded by the federal government, was used to harden boundaries that segregated communities, and sometimes it was used to eliminate communities altogether. And so by the time we finish the Atlanta Beltline Trail Network in 2030, we're going to be able to reconnect communities that were divided for generations, 45 different distinct neighborhoods. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some before and after photos fairly quickly so you can understand just what I mean when I'm talking about restitching these neighborhoods. So this is Ponce City Market, formerly this Sears and Roebuck building. And every time I see this photo, I'm wondering when it was taken, because we have an electronic, you can go to the next slide. We have an electronic counter there. And in 2019, we were averaging 6,500 trips per day on this piece of trail. Next slide. Here's another photo of the East Side Trail that runs up along Ponce City Market. You can go to the next one. Should be back one more, I think, to the finished trail. There we go. Nope, one more. Two more. There, I think we're going for it. That's okay. So the area around Ponce City Market has now turned, there we go. That's it. Oh. Around Ponce City Market has become the highest office rent in the city. And you can see how far we came to get there. You can go to the next slide. Historic, perfect. So EPA was an early supporter of the Beltline. When you look at this photo, you can get a sense of the brownfield support that went into the project. It took real vision to look at this. Go ahead and go to the next slide and see that it could turn into this after redevelopment. You go to the next slide. This area was prone to flooding with stormwater and sewer issues. And now, go ahead, next slide. It's the location of community gatherings and even weddings. Next slide. So over on the West Side Trail, this is what the corridor looks like before the Beltline. Next slide. And here's what it looks like after U.S. Department of Transportation awarded a Tiger grant for construction. So next slide. I want to talk real quickly about how did this happen financially. This is a complicated slide that I'm going to blow right through really quickly. We've had a good mix of public and private dollars. The city of Atlanta has been key with the Beltline Service Special Service District in the tax allocation district. The federal government funding has also been key. We can't unlock these kind of government funds without matching funds, and private philanthropy has been critical to our success. On a personal note, I want to acknowledge that back in 2015, one of our major foundations stepped forward, recognized the capacity challenges it can take to get this kind of government funding, and actually created and underwrote my position for 3 years so that we had the resources in-house to just focus on making sure that we were leveraging federal grants. Next slide. So we can't talk about our federal investments in the Beltline without mentioning our amazing congressional delegation. Our CEO likes to refer to them as the WOW team. Senator Warnock, Senator Ossoff, and Congressman Williams. They've been real champions for our success. This is our second raise grant, actually under the Biden administration. And it builds on years and years of additional federal funding, including, I mentioned ARC, our MPO has been critical in making sure that federal formula funds have been coming our way throughout the history of the project. Next slide. So as you can see in the before and after photos, we have a really strong story to tell in terms of financing and how that turns into economic development impacts that can be counted. And that data is really important as we're asking for additional support. Next slide. But as you also looked at those photos, you might notice that it can trigger affordability challenges. And so before I end, I just wanted to touch on that and mention that as we're continuing to advance trail construction, we've really taken a major shift and focused quite a bit on real estate acquisition as a key strategy to delivering affordable housing. And I'm sure all of you have already paged through the 68-page Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods Program guidelines. And in that, you'll see that this kind of connection is really important to USDOT as well, as they're focusing on the White House Housing Supply Action Plan. Next slide. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Lena. That's fantastic. And I think it's so inspiring to see how you can put the different funding sources together, private philanthropy as the ability to create the match, to create the capacity to access those resources, and the power of what federal funding can do to move a vision forward in, it doesn't always feel like a fast timeline, but in a pretty reasonably well-timed situation. And I'm going to now welcome Sarah from the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia to talk a little bit about, there's similar funding stories here. There's similar, lots of similarities in what's happening in the Greater Philadelphia region and what's happening in Atlanta. But I think, Sarah, what we're really looking forward to hearing from you about is how do we leverage that for lasting change, right? How do we leverage all of this investment for the pipeline for what's to come? Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brandy, and thank you, Rails to Trails Conservancy, for having me here. I'm delighted to speak with you all. And as Brandy mentioned, I run the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, but I'm also chair of the Circuit Trails Coalition, which is a network of over 70 organizations. Can we go to the next slide? And what I'm going to talk about is the evolution of our work, our advocacy to move the circuit forward. The circuit is the name of our network in our 9-county region of Philadelphia, surrounded by 8 counties. Next slide. This is a map of what our network looked like before 2010. And it looks very similar today, but a little bit more complete, thankfully. But as you can see, it's a whole mess of different connected trails that span over 9 different counties. And unlike the Atlantic Beltway, this is a very decentralized trail network that is being built piece by piece by different entities, mostly municipal and county entities, but also some nonprofit organizations or community development groups. So again, it's a very decentralized system that has to work together to get progress. Next slide. So if you can just scroll, we have like 4 little animations. In 2010, the region won the first a Tiger grant from the first slew of grants that USDOT put out. And because of that Tiger grant, our local philanthropy, the William Penn Foundation, awarded an additional $10 million to help spark new studies and design efforts to get more projects ready for construction. This really was the catalyst for the circuit in our region. We branded the regional network at that name, and we formed the coalition, and we started to work on ensuring that there was as much funding made available as possible to advance the circuit. Next slide. This is just a slide to show you the different organizations that are part of the Circuit Trails Coalition. Next slide. And the first thing that one of the most important things that we did was to ensure that the circuit was embedded in our NPO, that's the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, embedded in our long-term plan. So we got it first mentioned and talked about as a regional bicycle pedestrian project in the 2013 long-term plan, which is Connections 2040. And that was the linchpin for being able to point to that plan and say, see, this is why projects need to be prioritized for different kinds of funding. About 8 years later, we did the same thing with Connections 2050, but we even went further. And in that plan, we, the coalition, the advocacy side of it, asked that the circuit trails try to reach a max 500 miles by 2025. The whole network, I should have mentioned, is over 800 miles when it is complete. And we are only about 40% there right now. So in order to reach that goal, but in the next couple of years to get to 500, that's what's been driving us to really push for new funding sources. Next slide. One of the things we also got done in 2015 was we got one line item in the Pennsylvania Transportation Improvement Program, our TIP, that was dedicated to the circuit. And that was a good first step. But as you can see, it's limited. It was only for sort of looking out 4 years. And it's a fairly modest amount of funding with a lot of projects that now have access to it, but it's not dedicated funding for the entire length of the project life. Next slide. So in the 2050 Connections long-term plan, which came out in I think 2021, again, it was the circuit was declared a major regional project. It embraced the goal of 500 miles, and it stated that 4.5% of the region's budget would be dedicated to bicycle pedestrian projects, which in our view committed about $55 million a year. Next slide. And we did an analysis of looking at the TIP to see, well, how much funding is there for dedicated bicycle pedestrian projects. And we found that it didn't really match up with what the plan laid out as the goal, and that there was a gap of about $10 to $20 million. So we have been recommending that that projects, large projects, be programmed directly on the TIP for the entire length of its lifetime. So a different approach than simply one line item. Next slide. And the reason is that we have about 90 miles to go to get to that 500 miles, and we really need to accelerate the amount of the funding and the project delivery in order to get to that 500 mile goal. Next slide. And I put this in to show that there has been a lot of funding dedicated since 2010. This is about $355 million. If I back it out or divide by the amount of miles that have been added since 2010, it's been about $2.2 million a mile, which is pretty good. But we need to keep going, and we need to accelerate that by adding even more funding in order to accelerate the amount of miles that get delivered. Next slide. One of the things that we've been doing is putting out a report every year that documents what is left to be done in terms of the number of the individual segments by county, as a way to highlight the amount of possibilities there are for projects to get done. And we have taken upon ourselves to kind of highlight one project in particular that we want, as advocates, that we want to push for prioritization. And this is a piece of sort of our strategy to hold everyone accountable for, here are the arrays of segments, here's what's possible. Let's get it moving and get it funded. Next slide. And that report that we put out has put out a bunch of policy recommendations. Two big ones are to increase staff capacity at the county and regional level, and to program sort of the most complicated projects directly onto the tip with formula funds. That is, while the circuit has been successful in winning grants such as the Early Tiger Grant and subsequent grants, formula funds have been rarely used for circuit projects. Next slide. And so the thing that we have been saying, and especially recently, is that using grants programs is really kind of holding the circuit back from really reaching its full potential. And trail development has slowed down in the last 5 years. Granted, the COVID was a big part of that, but we have seen the sort of rate of miles completed going down, down, down. And by just limiting the circuit to competitive grants and line items over a 4-year period, we're not going to really be able to tackle these bigger, larger projects. So next slide. So what we have been doing is a couple of things. One is that we have been advocating for the use of TASA technical assistance funds to help address the staff capacity issue, and that we have successfully done in Pennsylvania. I should have mentioned that we are an MPO that covers both Pennsylvania counties and New Jersey. And we have been encouraging our counties and the city of Philadelphia to formally request that their highest priority project for the circuit be programmed onto the next tip using formula funds, whether that be carbon reduction program, surface transportation, urban, or surface transportation block grant. And so this is new. This is not something that has been done a lot, but we are urging our elected officials and our MPO to adopt that. And so that's the goal, to get circuit projects programmed using federal formula funds. Next slide, and I think that's the last one. And this is just taken last week. One of our circuit projects got a $19 million raise grant in New Jersey and Camden County for I think a number of about 8 miles of trail that's going to be built from the Ben Franklin Bridge over to one of our parks in Camden. So we are super excited about the potential for the circuit to really make headway and meet the goals. And we're excited that we have so much opportunity with the BIL to do that. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think it's so interesting, the point you made that this is a decentralized trail network. There's so many different parties building it compared to in other places where it might be one entity that's really kind of leading the charge and doing that organizing. But the similarities in the role of the MPO, the role of kind of leveraging the moment and the opportunity around federal funds to kind of advance a conversation, I think is really important. And we're going to open it up now to Q&A. So I'm going to see everybody's faces here in just a second. And the first question I have, I'm actually going to open it to Sarah for you first, and Lena, please jump in. But the question here, there's a lot of folks that we've been watching in the chat from all across the country, different size, regions, size of kind of towns versus cities, and all different kind of levels of progress in their trail network planning. What advice do you have for them? The importance of the established relationships with the MPOs, the importance of embedding the plan into the long-term planning for the region. What advice for right now? Like, we've got this moment in front of us, whether you have those relationships or not, where do you get started? How do you get the MPO kind of on board quickly? What's that first conversation that you would encourage people to have?
I would go to your best likelihood champion who is an elected official. And so having a mayor or a county commissioner who wants to make this a priority and have it be part of their legacy is your best chance, because that's really, they hold the decision-making power. to make around how to spend transportation dollars. And so ideally, they're one of the representatives that sits on the MPO, but that's not absolutely necessary. But the fact that you have that champion arguing for the project or to be made a priority among all the priorities. There's many, so competitive, right? That's what you need.
Lena, what would you add?
I would add to that I completely agree, but then also as you're doing it, thinking about what can you do to make it easier for them to say yes. And so we're very strategic and intentional in looking at what are the problems that our elected officials and our community is trying to solve and address. And what is it that we can do to help solve that problem and make sure that we're helping connect the dots, because that just makes it so much easier to make the case for funding, whether it's with our MPO or at the federal level.
There was something in our prep that we were talking about that, Kevin, I want to flip to you real quick. We had talked about how those conversations and those moments are also like, how do you start to build the relationship? What's like the easy ask? What's the way in the door?
Yeah, well, it may be circumstantial that you see an opportunity. There's like no better time than now if you don't have the relationship yet. But also one of the things we're dealing with in the moment in a lot of places is that as I mentioned at the beginning, the dollars are gushing, and folks are looking to take advantage of this moment. And so if you don't have a well established relationship yet, it would never hurt to go and say, we really would like your backing for this application we're putting in, and that could be a point at which you start the conversation. And I think it'd be a rare MPO that wouldn't be interested in backing what you're trying to do. And I think you can also find elected officials that would want to do. It's very common with these federal discretionary grants to get the representative in Congress for that area to back it. That definitely increases your chances of success, and it's also a relationship builder.
Liz, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to just add on to what Sarah said, and really everyone said, that my experience doing this with the Capitol Trails Coalition, when we went to lots of different elected officials over the last 3 years, ultimately culminated in a raise award a couple of weeks ago. So we're really excited about that for the Capitol Trails Network. But the first thing they'll ask is, is there community support for this project? So I would just say being really prepared to show with a lot of different voices that community support exists and is willing to, speak up, that there is support for the project or projects, plural, that, you're advocating for. It's really important.
So here's a question that actually just came in the chat for Lena that we'll start here. And if others have perspectives, please jump in. But just the question about the role of real estate acquisition as a means to maintaining affordability, preventing displacement, and that there's some documentation on that. So can you just share with folks any insights you want to add or any resources that might be useful?
Sure, absolutely. And part of our strategy on real estate acquisition is if you control the land, you can control how it's used. And so that makes it a lot easier for us to ensure that there is affordable housing that is adjacent to and very near the BELTLINE. And that's becoming more and more important, especially in different market conditions, just to make sure that we are able to have that control over it. In terms of I was looking at the chat as well. The document, I think they might have been referring to the Reconnecting Communities notice of funding that came out, and that there is a mention in there of affordable housing. And I don't know, Brandy or
we're going to talk about that in a bit.
Excellent.
Yes, we sure are. It's breaking news. That's even the name.
Yes.
Of the slide. Happy 4th of July to everybody. So another question that I'm going to kick it off again to you, Lena, and then to you, Sarah. Just this idea of the community support, the political will, creating those champions, the elected leaders, the local leaders who are saying this matters to our community. This is essential. We need to invest in these places. As you've built those relationships, what's motivated those champions? What's been a driver for them?
That's a great question. So let me back up for a second and just reiterate that word relationship. It is a relationship. It's not a transaction. And so it's important to keep in mind, any relationship in your life, how do you maintain that relationship and what keeps it a healthy, productive relationship? And so what has kind of motivated that, it has changed over time. We've had really challenging periods in our history with the public, and through and really wonderful times too. And through those times, what I think has been most important is transparency and consistent communication, not just with the general public, but also with our elected officials, and not in silos. So we have a very robust community engagement team. We meet with the public regularly. We don't do anything without going to the public and talking to them about it. And we try to make sure it's a practice that every time we do that, we invite an elected official to join us, so that, whether or not they're able to, that sometimes can change, but that's just a built-in part of our fabric, that we are all working together in partnership all the time, not just when we need something.
So we come at this from I certainly, from my organization, comes at it from more of an advocacy sort of perspective. And we, spent a number of years building up, an awareness among our constituents and others who are interested in trails, and specific trails, to communicate, and it gave them opportunities to communicate with elected officials. One of the great things about trails that everyone, I'm sure, here understands and knows is that, people are feel very personally invested in their own trail. And so when we needed to get, an elected official's attention about an opportunity for specific trail, we could organize those constituents and those supporters real quick. And our elected officials learned pretty quickly that there's a lot of support for trails, and there are pieces of infrastructure that can be built, relatively quickly. I mean, I don't want to overstate that, but and when they get delivered, people are really happy. And we strategically would host groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, so to give the opportunity for the elected officials to understand how happy this was making their own constituents. And that really, really worked, because they saw that for a relatively, in the transportation world, for relatively small amounts of money, they could get a big win. And when COVID happened, trails were hot, right? Everyone needed to be on one, and we all know that story. And that was, again, reinforced to elected officials, that having these kinds of amenities and resources available to their constituents is super important. And so what we have found is there is a lot of support for conceptually for making funds available for trails. But what we're now in the stage of is, like, we're competing now more directly with roads and bridges. We don't want to be saying like either or at any stage, but we are saying that trails should be treated like roads and bridges and built like them, not doing it in another way that is just so much more piecemeal and takes so much longer.
I think that's such an important point. And as we move into the last kind of portion of our conversation today, I think just emphasizing, if we want to connect the nation by trail, if we want regional trail networks in every community, so that you can, in theory, from your home, be able to get outside, whether that's for recreation or for transportation, if we want those things to be true, we have to start thinking about it as a systems issue. We have to start thinking about it as, how do we create infrastructure in other ways, and I think that's such an important point. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to say that out loud or to ask for it. So we're going to move to the next slide here, and we're going to close our conversation with a few minutes from Kevin and a few minutes from Liz. Kevin's going to tell us about This has all been good news, but it's not done. And there's still a lot of opportunity that hasn't been tapped, and there's still a lot of work to do. And then Liz is going to leave us with our call to action. Take it away, Kevin.
Yeah, I was just picking up on the conversation with just having, if you're a mayor, you have a responsibility to your community in so many different areas, right? But mobility, think about how a trail can help with mobility, with health, with equity, with the environment, and so on. And that's really a chance to highlight the advantages of making these investments, because it can help in all those different ways. And that's why it's often very popular with local elected officials across the spectrum. So we think when we're successful, communities begin to view walk bike infrastructure as essential to their success, not just a nice to have amenity. And the kind of switch in the way things are funded that Sarah and Lena have been addressing reflects that transition to thinking of it as something you have to have. You stop thinking about what is the spare change we might have in the cushions that would help us do one of the projects on our priority list, to wait, we have all of these critical connections to make the system work. How do we get it done soon? And so that's the transition we want to see occur to be really successful. And so and we think that, you know, if you start centering the case here in terms of the right people have to get somewhere safely and conveniently, that the community, all the communities need to prosper economically and environmentally. People should be active outside to be, you know, have well-being, and so that is why we need to treat them as essential. Next slide. So key differentiator here, we think, is where active transportation is treated as essential, network connectivity is central to that case. Because when you start leveraging a trail here or there, or a bike lane here or a sidewalk there, and connecting people to everyday destinations, connecting communities to each other, it starts to provide more of those benefits, and those get magnified. And that is helps it jump to the forefront of the priorities. Next slide. So what are some of the drivers of success? You know, connectivity, as we just mentioned, that, you know, if you have a good vision, you have good plans that show that, you got to build political will and get to the point of, we're going to get this done, you know, come hell or high water. You want to have commitment to the values that were in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law: safety, equity, sustainability, and then it will rise to the top. And we want to have policies that make sure there's accountability to those values, and funding programs that are focused on the bigger picture of the connectivity and making the system work. Next slide. So the funding tools to do that, you want to have dedicated sources that are available everywhere. There's some places that are not as far along that need to build the kind of the first pieces of their system. You want to make sure you have those things. So for instance, Transportation Alternatives Program, I mentioned, biggest source of funding available. It can be used more strategically than maybe it historically has been to provide more funding for connectivity, but it also can help places get started. And then we need to make sure we have investments that are scaled to the gap filling needs. And that is where something like the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program comes in, because it's looking at saying, how much do we need to get the job done? We've got multiple segments. Let's think of that as a system. Let's make sure we fund it as such. And then we want the creative leaders that are accelerating progress, demonstrating impact, and thinking in terms of what we heard from Sarah and Lena, that you're ready to commit the flexible dollars, the formula dollars this way. Also states making their own investments in this, not just saying, well, this is how much we got, you know, from the feds, so we're done, right? And making that local, state, and federal partnership to accelerate things and get it all done. And finally, things you can do at every level, right? So the vision, the pipeline, access to dollars, and so on at the local level, state and regional. You're, you know, making sure you're using the federal dollars that come to that level well, and trying to get some more federal and state level investments. And then we had already mentioned supporting the right federal programs we need, and then equitable access to the resources. Let's hand it to Liz.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So to wrap up here, we want to emphasize we're in this really unique moment. We've got demand from so many people across the country who want more access to trails and trail networks. We know that places are prioritizing it as a way for them to be healthier, more economically competitive places where people want to live. And we've got the funding lined up. So we've got this really unique moment that we're in, a once in a generation moment to activate this opportunity. And we just really want to encourage everyone, don't wait for perfect. We want to be able to prove as a movement that this demand for trail networks outpaces the supply, and that this funding opportunity, these multiple funding opportunities, are really a way to show success as we head into reauthorization in the future. And so this is really the foundation moment, not only to create success, create big wins and new trail infrastructure, but to set us up for the next moment. So a few things you can do in this moment. As I mentioned earlier, we're so welcome to engage with us on our Trail Nation Collaborative. We have over 7,500 folks signed up at this point. We'd love to have more of you involved, but we're so excited to have so many of you. We do webinars like this. We do more dialogue styles where give you an opportunity to come on the screen and talk to each other. We've got our playbook, we've got in-person events, and then we have really exciting, we have technical assistance coming soon. So stay tuned to hear more about that coming this fall. And as Brandy and Lena mentioned earlier, next slide, please, we have really exciting news. Hopefully you've heard about it, the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods funding program from USDOT. It's due September 28th. There's over $3 billion in funding available. And really it's prioritizing disadvantaged communities. It's looking to improve access to daily needs like jobs, education, healthcare, food, and recreation. And it really prioritizes equitable development and just really looks at reconnecting communities where there's been points of disconnection in the past. And to Lena's earlier point, I wanted to highlight that the planning grants are able to address associated needs like locally driven land use and zoning reform, including housing supply, in particular, affordable housing supply that's location efficient. So take a look at that. We really encourage everyone to maximize all of these opportunities. And our final slide, just want to reiterate that you don't have to have all of the pieces perfectly lined up. It's great to just start applying, make that momentum. It's get everything in your pipeline now. And these investments are so critical. And we know that they are really changing the infrastructure of our country and therefore, our places and all of our lives and the kind of access to infrastructure that we have. So if you need help, we are here for you. Rails to Trails is here, and we encourage you to reach out. So thanks so much for attending today. We really appreciate having you and appreciate all of our speakers today, Sarah and Lena. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. And that is the big takeaway message. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to start. And I think the point that Kevin and Liz made as well of getting those applications in, making sure we're showing that there's demand. We are kind of in an urgency moment here with just a few years left in this reauthorization. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to leverage everything we can at this time, but also sending a very clear message that this infrastructure matters. It's essential to communities, and we need to prioritize it the same way we prioritize other infrastructure. So take that message. I hope you're inspired, and we'll see you offline.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.